Sunday I went to the Day for Freedom March, which started appropriately enough at Speaker's Corner and ended up, equally appropriately, bang outside Downing Street in Whitehall. Whilst I was loitering with intent before the march and glaring at the surveillance camera on top of an unmarked green van, whose driver I quizzed a little, who said he was working for the police and that the van was supposed to be overt rather than covert, I asked him in that case why it was an unmarked van. He didn't provide me with an answer, but just looked confused. As I say, whilst I was there, I was accosted by a young bloke who asked me if I was the guy who made the video about Jordan Peterson. That was a slightly surreal feeling, to be honest. It seems as if I have the kind of face that people do recognise, even from decades back. And even had at age 47 somebody remember me from when I was 12. I had no idea who he was, but he knew me, even though I think I must have changed just a little in the intervening 35 years. But this was slightly different in that I was recognised for something I had done. Like I say, strange. But anyway, his name was Veedu, and after a short chat he asked me if he could interview me. Stranger still, but he was pretty affable and I agreed. If you're interested, and if I can work out how to do it, I'll put the link in the low bar underneath. It turns out that Veedu has his own channel, Veedu Vids, which reflects his personal story. He is, as he described himself to me, an ex-Muslim. His output is prodigious, considering he's only been doing it for a while. But you should take a look, because he managed to take a comic slant at some really serious topics. And he doesn't shy away from the big issues either. What's the meaning of life, for example, which is tackled in a little over 3 minutes. And who hasn't got 3 minutes? Some are a little disturbing, to be honest, like when he takes on the persona of Cathy Newman. I just hope you never feel the urge to transition, Veedu, because nobody wants to see that. Anyway, I marched, or rather strolled, through the West End, down Piccadilly, some of which I was astonished to discover has only single yellow lines, so you can actually park there on a Sunday. On Piccadilly. That's almost worth the drive into central London just for the novelty. But finally we got to the stage with this enormous screen that was right by the gates of Downing Street. But I don't think Theresa was in though. The atmosphere was jolly, I would say. Good-natured, not threatening. I heard subsequently that the misnamed and supposedly anti-fascist bunch called Antifa were there somewhere, but I didn't see them or hear them at the time. But it was good to hear the speakers. They were all good, but Dankula was especially impressive, and Milo rose to the occasion magnificently, while seeming to take it all in his stride. I was disappointed to find that a bloke called Ali Darwar didn't speak as billed. It sounds as if there was an administrative balls up about whether he was invited or not. In the end he wasn't allowed to speak. And for a free speech event, that doesn't look good, whatever the reason. So that was the only thing that marred the whole day, other than the fact that I got dehydrated and provoked a migraine because I didn't want to lose my place. But I went home feeling that I was glad to have been there and filled with a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, the normal, sane, reasonable British public might manage to prevent this country from becoming a totalitarian Orwellian dystopia. As I've said before, I no longer have a television, so I mostly get my news from the radio and sometimes from buying a paper. So I do try and buy a paper every day. Most of them are shit, but I think the most unshit one is the Eye. It's left of centre, but not moronically so is bearable. Unless Yasmin Alibhai-Brown is doing the opinion piece, that is. I look forward to the day when this nasty, spiteful, hateful and downright mean-spirited little woman might say something nice about the country that provided a haven for her when Idi Amin kicked all the Asians out of Uganda in 1972. However, I may be waiting some time. So her article on the following Wednesday was entitled, "The Right Has Weaponised Free Speech." It has a large photograph of some counter-protest. I've got it here, look. There we go. There we go. And of course there's a picture of some counter-protesters. There's a black woman in the middle, and behind her this "No to Racism" sign. So the implication being is that the people there for the freedom of speech march were for racism. But we were there for freedom of speech, which has nothing whatever to do with racism. And the banner is from the Socialist Worker. So can we conclude that Alibhai-Brown is a socialist worker? Or is she a tremendously privileged member of the media elite? Anyway, she started as she meant to go on. The first word, "the," I have no problem with, since you have to start somewhere, and "the" is as good a place as any. The second word, however, is where things start to go wrong for me. The right, as in the right has weaponised free speech. What is it? Apparently I'm now part of it. I'm part of it because I believe in free speech. So that makes me right-wing, does it? Maybe it even makes me far-right. And of course we all know what that means. That means fascism, and then racism. And by that logic, I'm surprised we weren't shoveling Jews into gas chambers by the time we got to Half Moon Street. See, that's the trouble with people like her. I'm not even going to call her left-wing, since I believe there are quite a number of people who hold, shall we say, left-of-centre views that are completely reasonable. There are reasonable, sane, and even patriotic socialists. But that's the trouble with these shrill, panicky voices. If you don't agree completely with their point of view, you are beyond the pale. Your opinions are unacceptable. And so now, we're not going to talk to you. There. That's the problem solved, isn't it? Don't talk to them. They're unacceptable. It's boring, isn't it? It's really, really boring. So the right has weaponised free speech, has it? And that's a bad thing. Is it not better to battle with words and ideas rather than baseball bats and pickaxe handles? Perhaps you would prefer that. Of course it's been weaponised. It's supposed to be. That's what civilization does. It argues, it puts claim against counterclaim. When things get messy, it might use insults. But you're supposed to weaponise language. That's what its purpose is, you dummy. And this woman is supposed to be an intellectual. Anyway, after taking a little detour about a non-spat between two non-entities, she gets all emotive. She says, "This society needs us all to be mindful of the hurt and damage we can cause with words, and that verbal incontinence is not an absolute right." This society needs us all to be mindful of the hurt and damage we can cause with words. There's a lot I can agree with there. Know why? Because I'm a normal person with feelings, and I would like, as far as is possible, for people to like me. So I try not to say nasty things to people. And I don't want them to say nasty things to me either. We know this, Yasmin. We know. However, there are times that hurt and damage, real hurt and real lifelong and debilitating damage, can be caused because people were afraid to use the weapon of words, of speech. For instance, how many young girls in Rotherham and Rochdale and Bristol and Oxford and Newcastle and now Telford could have been spared the hurt and the probably unfixable damage that they endured if only someone had used words. Whatever happened to sticks and stones, for Pete's sake? But the next bit, verbal incontinence is not an absolute right. I'm tempted at this juncture to go all Jordan Peterson. and suggests that she has been perfectly willing to offend me in this article, as well as all the others, with her verbal incontinence, why should she have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable. So she is making, or rather trying to make, a distinction here between verbal incontinence, or hate speech perhaps, as she would like it, and free speech. There is no distinction. There isn't. None whatsoever. Verbal incontinence should be an absolute right. You can't mess with freedom of speech. It's the most important value we have, bar none. There is no such thing as hate speech. There is only speech. She continues, and continues to make my ears bleed, which she has a perfect right to do, of course, with a snide remark about a group named Veterans Against Terrorism, before going on to denigrate me, since I was there, as anti-migrant, not true, anti-EU, broadly true, xenophobic, absolutely not true, sexist, nope, and nationalist, true, if by that you mean patriotic. They went to hear their heroes, she says, including ex-EDL leader Tommy Robinson. Now, Tommy Robinson is someone I would have run a mile from up until quite recently, as he always seemed to be the face of racism. He was always what respectable England, in particular, always portrayed as an unacceptable hate figure. He looked, and more to the point I now realise, he sounded the part. From Luton, with a very, very working class accent that was anathema to middle class ears. He was easy to hate, because hating racists is easy. Because not only are they hateful, they're also morons. But over time, little things I've heard him say, the little things that were broadcast, which wasn't much, began to sound as if they might have something behind them. And I began to listen a little more carefully, rather than just dismissing him as I had before. I remained wary, and still am, but I have yet to hear him actually say anything racist. I suppose because he has always been tarred with that brush, he has learned to be very careful with his words. But that's not to say that he is covering something up. Jordan Peterson is very careful with his words. A chapter in his book is entitled, "Be Precise in Your Speech." So he's in good company. And I have to say that I began to have a grudging respect for him. Once I started to listen more carefully, I began to realise that he had been banging this drum for a very long time. And he refuses to be gagged. And he has been persecuted for it, being conveniently convicted for mortgage fraud. And still he doesn't shut his gob. And he has taken the bullet for the rest of us that were too frightened or too bloody polite to say anything. And so it was, I'll admit, slightly uncomfortable for someone who went on anti-Nazi League demos when I was younger, to be on a march with people chanting Tommy Robinson's name. But that's my fault, and everybody else's fault for not saying what we should have said. It's our fault for not using words and not weaponising the language. She also has a go at the new UKIP leader, whose favourite hobby is Muslim goading. I refer you again, Yasmin, to Rotherham and Rochdale and Bristol and Newcastle and Oxford and Telford. Mark Meakin, Count Dacula, is described as a hideous vlogger who showed anti-Semitic entertainment on YouTube. Then she really goes off the rails. These freedom fighters want to get rid of minorities, to ban Islam, to silence liberals, to eradicate equality and diversity policies, and make their country great, white and masculine again. Freedom fighter. Well, in this she flatters me, even though she's being sarcastic, since I haven't done much, or even enough, fighting. I want to get rid of minorities then. Well, I should have to banish my wife if that's the case. and that will sadden me somewhat. And I want to ban Islam, do I? No, I don't. I just want it to fucking grow up and be normal and follow the rule of law, not to expect special treatment, and not to demand that non-Muslims should be bound by the same restrictions that Muslims voluntarily submit themselves to. I'm not in the slightest bit interested in drawing cartoons of Muhammad, but if I want to, I will. Do I want to eradicate equality and diversity policies? Some of them, yes. But I also want my girls to know that they can and will succeed on their own merit, rather than just because they have a uterus, or that the shade of their skin has anything to do with it. And do I want to make my country great, masculine and white again? Well, yes, and not especially. My country is great, and it remains great, despite the determined efforts of many. And when I say great, I don't just mean powerful in a military sense, although that is a part of it, since a weak country is no good to anyone. When I say great, I mean better. I mean stronger and richer and fairer and more compassionate and more dependable and braver and kinder and more free. And I mean a place that is a pleasure to live in. We marched last weekend to make sure that that is not undermined. I wonder if Alibhai-Brown wants that. And do I want it to be masculine? Well, I want it to be more masculine than it has been of late. And ideally want it to be masculine where it should be. As I want it to be feminine where it should be. And it is mostly white. And that's okay. It's something I'm neither proud nor ashamed of. And without any irony, she says Sunday's march revealed the influence of a new fascism in our country. Yeah, and it came from the censorious morons on the other side. One of them, she says, was Sharon, a student of fashion design, who told her in tears that she felt like her relatives must have in Lithuania during the Second World War, when Nazis encouraged locals to get rid of the Jewish problem and decent people did nothing. So, she's not actually calling us Nazis, since she probably suspects that that mud doesn't stick anymore, at least without evidence. But she is equating a march supporting everybody's right to speak their minds and to say, without fear, what is in their hearts. She's equating that with the Nazi Holocaust. Subtle. God, she's a moron. She then announces that she's publishing a book on how freedom of speech and political correctness have been weaponised in today's culture wars. It's a shout out, she says, to all those who love this hitherto open, mixed, dynamic country. Like me, you mean, Yasmin? I can't wait.